Hi guys, have you missed me? I've had some requests to make a video for comparative structure, comparing two texts together. So that's what we're going to have today. I'm going to separate it into 3 videos so that you can quickly choose between introductions, body paragraphs and conclusions. Let's get started. So if you think of a normal text response essay, it's an introduction, 4 body paragraphs and a conclusion. With a comparative, because you've got to write so much more, you might want to cut that down to 3 body paragraphs. Introduction's pretty much the same as any standard text response essay, and so is the conclusion. The body paragraphs is where it changes a little bit. Please note that there are a lot of different types of structure. This is just the one that I prefer personally and the one that I find easiest to mark just because of the signposting, etc. So I'm teaching this one, but there's other structures out there. So for the introduction, you have the comparative SAC is thematically based. So the whole focus of this SAC is about themes, ideas and issues. So we know that the essay question you're going to get is going to be theme-based or idea-based. So you want to start with explaining how that big picture theme links into the real world. Then you want to introduce your 2 texts and your 2 authors. It does not have to happen in that first sentence. It can happen anywhere in your introduction as long as it's there. After that, you outline your 3 ideas just like any other essay, and you might want to include a quote if you want. Some people don't like the feel of how their introductions end. It doesn't feel like it's ready to move on. So if you struggle with that, you can introduce a quote into it. Just make sure that you don't start exploring that quote until the body paragraph, and if your introduction is getting pretty long, leave that part out. Not compulsory, just a suggestion. Let's have a look at some samples. Here's a high range sample. You'll see down the side there that I've indicated the criteria that you'll find in a high range. That's the criteria for the whole essay, and some of this criteria we find already just in the introduction. This introduction is a little bit long. If that was a criticism that I would make, that would be probably the only one, that there's too much background and it's a little bit long, but it's still a very, very high range introduction. So let's have a look. Both for Fred de Gois and Tom Wright, the pervasive impact of prejudice must be recognised, acknowledged and ultimately broken. When you look at the lower samples, you'll notice that this bit that's underlined in red is a complex idea. It's not just saying prejudice is everywhere. It's saying that the authors think that prejudice should be recognised. We need to acknowledge that it exists, and we need to acknowledge that it needs to be broken. You'll notice with the orange underlined sections that they are meta-language words. They're pretty basic meta-language words. This essay goes on to use some much more sophisticated phrases. It's not in the criteria for the exam that you use meta-language, but I would still recommend you use it. For the SACs, meta-language is definitely there, so make sure you use it. I'm going to skip down to the green bit. The previous bit is just some context and it links into the first idea. The green bit, however, is evidence that the student has been able to draw their own conclusions and look at the broader implications of points of comparison. It shows deep thought about the similarities and differences. This student has said, whilst the American Civil War of the 1860s may have overturned slavery, the overt system of prejudice, World War I, and the voluntary participation of Aboriginal servicemen failed to remove prejudice from Australia. That's obviously a point they're going to expand on later, but it's drawing their own conclusions about the difference between the 2 texts. The next section that I want you to notice is that light blue section down the bottom. So for de Gois and Wright, it is essential that such prejudicial attitudes and their racist applications must be systematically broken and disallowed for justice to occur for all. That would be a fine ending if you wanted to end there. You'll see that it addresses the complexity of the topic and looks beyond the obvious. So this topic is obviously to do with prejudice, and the introduction has not just said prejudice is bad, it's said much more sophisticatedly that prejudice needs to be stopped for justice to occur, and as long as prejudice exists, there is no justice. And the last bit there, otherwise the lasting collective memory will be pain trying to resurrect itself, and a strong sense by blacks that I don't belong will continue unchallenged. So that is using relevant quotes, blending them in, contextualizing it. That's an example of how you might use a quote in an introduction if you wanted. So here we have a mid-range introduction. You'll see some differences. Before I go into that too much, I'm just going to skip back to show you what the color coding means. If you get dizzy with prezzies, Please close your eyes for a second. I'll let you know when you can open them. Here we go. So, thematic context statement, text and author, outline 3 ideas. You do not have to have the quote, remember. So, yellow, red, green. So the yellow at the top, they've decided to start with the author's names and the title of the texts. Then they've put their big picture statement in the red, and their 3 ideas are clearly outlined in the green. You'll notice straight away that the language is not as sophisticated. For example, it still has the word pervasive. I'm assuming that's probably part of the essay question. Prejudice has a pervasive influence on everything. Both texts show that racism influences the events and characters, even though they are set in different times and countries. Both texts also show that when people of different races are in a relationship, the lack of equality in power will lead to friction and will eventually be the cause of their breakdown. You'll notice here that there is really no meta-language, except for, again, texts. There's no sophistication in the ideas they've got. They do have a slightly contrasting idea down the bottom. For Dubois and Wright, it's important that prejudice is systematically broken and stopped for justice to occur for all, otherwise nothing will change, even though they promote different ways to achieve this. That last statement there is obviously they're going to start their contrasting. This is a stock standard introduction, nothing special. It'll get you a pass, but won't get you any higher than probably a medium. And here's a low range introduction, and the thing that makes this a low range introduction is the fact that the ideas are example based. They're not actually ideas. So they're examples from the text, and I can see that already that is going to just be a longest memory paragraph. This is going to be a longest memory paragraph, and this is going to be a Black Diggers paragraph. So yeah, an example of them trying to maybe put a quote in, but hasn't really worked because they're focused entirely on examples rather than ideas. If you struggle with getting pen to paper, getting that first introduction sentence started, here's a set of introduction sentences that you might choose to use. Feel free to adapt them, practice with them. For example, this one here will fit pretty much any essay that you have. It is an inescapable truth that humanity is shaped and molded by experiences, especially when it comes to insert thing. When it comes to racism, when it comes to justice, when it comes to identity, when it comes to belonging. See how that sentence works? Use these to get you started. Practice using them. Make them your own though for the actual assessment. And that's all for introductions. Catch up with me for the next video on body paragraphs.